Call me old-fashioned. Better yet, make me one. Hello and welcome to Intoxicated Masculinity. If it's Wednesday, we have a cocktail video coming at you. And today is the second week of Old-Fashioned October. Since it's the second week of Old-Fashioned October, I thought it might be a good idea if we made ourselves a couple of Old Fashions. But first of all, a little bit about the cocktail. So as we said before, we talked about the whiskey cocktail and the improved whiskey cocktail. And I said then, and I'll say now, we're talking about those as two distinct, different cocktails, which isn't really true. They are sort of an evolution of one into the other. So what is the Old Fashioned? The Old Fashioned is sort of the kickback against the improved whiskey cocktail. Our whiskey cocktail is pretty tame. We just added a little bit of absinthe and a little bit of maraschino liqueur in very small amounts. But as the cocktail matured throughout the 1860s and 1870s and in the 1880s, the improved whiskey cocktail acquires tons of other ingredients. Things like orgeat, green chartreuse, all these other different things. And a lot of the old timers, especially getting the 1880s and 1890s, were like, we don't want none of that newfangled improved whiskey cocktail. We want the old-fashioned cocktail. So what the old-fashioned cocktail really is just a kickback. So it is a desire to sort of go back in time. So there's many versions of this cocktail made a lot of different ways. The constant is going to be a sugar, a bitter, and your whiskey on ice. The version I'm going to make is from the Old Waldorf Astoria cocktail book. This is the reprint in 1935. They talk about the drink being created at the Old Pendris Cocktail Club, which I don't believe that's correct. Dave Wondrich did a bunch of research and he thinks it actually goes back a little bit earlier than that. But I sort of like it because in the Waldorf they talk about it being sort of a favorite drink of James Pepper. And if you know anything about the bourbon industry in Kentucky, the Pepper family is huge. Elijah Pepper is the one who founded what is the current day Woodford Reserve Distillery. And Oscar Pepper was huge in distilling, and James Pepper was also huge in distilling. So it's a big distilling family. You know of the beans, but you probably should know the peppers too, because the peppers were big in that. One other thing you'll see a lot of disagreement on is whether or not to use bourbon or rye. I think today most people make this cocktail with bourbon, but that was not always the case. The Old Waldorf Astoria doesn't really say which to go with. My research tells me that it would kind of change throughout time. So what we're going to do is we're going to make the same cocktail twice, and we're going to make one with a bourbon and one with a rye. And to kind of keep things consistent, we're going to use the same company's bourbon and the same company's rye. So I think what we're going to do is put that in a couple glasses. And by the way, we're also going to make this in the glass. Again, a lot of people are going to make this in a mixing glass. That's perfectly fine. We're going to mix it in the glass because I think that's pretty close to what they would have been doing at the time. Alright, so we're back and we've got a couple of different whiskeys. We got a rye and a bourbon. We're going to use Smoke Wagon. We talked about the bourbon on our video, well, quite a while ago, talking about the Arizona and New Mexico distilleries. Well, sort of. These are actually from Nevada. And we actually talked about the Smoke Wagon Rye on this month's video on horror movies that I've seen in September. So I like both of them. Now one thing I did last month that I kind of wish I hadn't is I put the ice in first and then put the ingredients in, and I don't think that's really the right way of doing it. So we're going to do, again, these are both going to be the same. We're just going to use a rye in one and a bourbon in the other. So using our Old Waldorf Astoria, we're going to add a teaspoon of sugar. Then I'm going to add 2 teaspoons of water. So this is just going to help the sugar dissolve a little bit. We're going to add 2 dashes of our Angostura bitters. Alright, so we're going to mix those up a little bit before we add our whiskey. So we're going to mix these up just a little bit. You're not going to get all of your sugar dissolved. Now, some people would probably say it's probably better to use simple syrup instead of your sugar, and you're probably right. But again, I'm kind of making this in the classic way. If I was making these on my own, I would probably go ahead and use the simple syrup. Because your simple syrup, your sugar is already completely diluted. All right. So we're going to start on my right. We're going to go with our rye. So we're just going to add in 2 ounces of our rye whiskey there. And over here, fresh crack on that one. And go ahead and add 2 ounces of our bourbon. Once again, just going to give that a little bit of a mix. Now, when they served these originally, they would actually leave a spoon in when they gave you the drink, just to allow you to mix in any of your undissolved sugars. And mix our rye just a little bit. All right, and now we're going to get an ice cube in. So we're going to go ahead and slide in 1 big cube of ice into each. And I just kind of use the spoon to let it slide on down in there. So now we're just mixing for dilution and temperature. More temperature really than anything else though. So there's our rye. Grab our bourbon here. Again, just lower your cube on down in. And again, just give it a good mix to get your dilution to chill the drink down. Normally I use pre-chilled glasses, but in this case, since I was putting my sugar directly in there, I kind of wanted everything to stay room temperature until I put my ice cube in. Now the one thing that we are going to get maybe a tiny bit more dilution than we otherwise would, but I think it's going to be just fine. One more little turn with that. All right, and there we have our 2 old fashions. I'm going to try the rye first. It's very alive, because you know your bitters bring a certain degree of, I mean they bring bitterness, obviously, but they bring a certain degree of spiciness. It works really well with the rye. It kind of brings it to life. The sweetness is there. So the Waldorf book is actually adding about twice the sweetness that Dave Wondrich recommends in Imbibe as sort of the traditional recipe. I don't think it hurts it here because it's got your rye. It'll be interesting to see if that bothers us with the bourbon because the bourbon's already kind of sweet. It's interesting. The sweetness with the bourbon, I probably would cut that back. So if you're doing this recipe at home, I think the 1 teaspoon of sugar with the rye works just fine. With the bourbon, it might be just a little bit too much. So I think maybe half a teaspoon here. I find the rye to be a better cocktail. There's more going on with it. It just tastes more alive. The bourbon is not a bad cocktail, but it is definitely a little bit more sedate. Also, the Waldorf calls for a lime wedge, so we'll express that real quickly. I apologize. I've been bad with garnishes on the channel lately. See if that improves that. Yeah, definitely don't be like me and forget your garnish there. It adds kind of an effervescence to it. It makes it a more kind of it makes it taste a little bit more crisp, I think. A little I don't know. It definitely brings out I mean obviously citrus because there's citrus in there, but the citrus kind of mixes in well with yours. It also tamps down the bitterness and spiciness maybe just a little bit. For bourbon, That's odd. I don't like it as much in the bourbon. In the bourbon, I think I actually liked it better with the lemon. That's kind of strange. It's something that I didn't say that coming into this, but I've kind of always had a bias towards rye when it comes to this particular cocktail. Bourbon is a very sweet spirit, and I think in this cocktail it just brings too much sweetness. The rye it seems to mix in perfectly with the bitters. The sweetness doesn't make it too sweet, and again, obviously our lemon, which I initially forgot, brings a sort of lightness to it. I really like this cocktail a lot. I don't think it's bad with the bourbon, but I just think the bourbon isn't bringing as much to the table flavor-wise as a rye is. So I think I would probably go with this one. So this is our sort of standard old-fashioned, the standard old-fashioned that I would. You'll notice I did not put any orange or cherry in here. I personally don't feel like those have any place in this cocktail. But if you prefer those in there, by all means. Next week, what we're going to do is we're going to come back to Old-Fashioned October. And we're going to try a few different variations on the Old Fashioned. These are not going to be traditional Old Fashions. These are going to be cocktails that I like that are sort of somewhat related to the Old Fashioned in some way. But until then, I want to thank everybody for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe. Have a good drink, and have a good day.